The crystalline walls of the Galactic Council chamber pulsed with a sickly green light as Princess Zarath limped toward the judgment seat. Each step sent sharp pain through her damaged left leg, the result of a childhood accident that had marked her as imperfect in the eyes of her people. The mechanical brace wrapped around her limb hummed softly, its blue glow a stark contrast to the golden skin that marked her as royalty among the Veltar. "Another rejection," announced council leader Mordak, his voice echoing through the vast chamber like a death sentence. "The Centaurian ambassador finds Princess Zarath unsuitable for alliance through marriage." Zarath's violet eyes flashed with barely contained fury. Behind her, the assembled crowd of her people whispered among themselves, their disappointment palpable in the recycled air of the space station. This was the 14th rejection in as many months. 14 potential allies who had taken one look at her scarred face and damaged leg before politely declining the proposed union. "Your Highness," Mordak continued, his three eyes focusing on her with what might have been pity, "perhaps it is time to consider alternative arrangements." Zarath knew what he meant. Alternative arrangements. A quiet retirement to some distant moon, far from the political machinations that kept their dying empire from complete collapse. Her younger sister, Kaleth, would take her place as heir, and Zarath would fade into obscurity with her books and her gardens. "There is one more option," interrupted a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Every head turned to see Ambassador Chen walking into the chamber, his human form small and seemingly fragile compared to the towering aliens around him. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his brown eyes held a determination that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The humans wish to speak," Mordak said with barely concealed contempt. "How quaint." Chen stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite his diplomatic robes. "The Terran Federation has reviewed the proposal. We are interested in discussing terms." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The humans were known throughout the galaxy for their stubbornness, their refusal to bow to the established order. They were newcomers, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel a century ago, and their small territory was constantly under threat from more established powers. Zarath felt her heart skip a beat. Could it be? After 14 rejections, could these upstart humans be her salvation? "And what?" Mordak asked slowly. "Would the Terran Federation want in return for such an alliance?" Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. "Protection, trade routes, and access to Veltar biotechnology." He paused, letting his words sink in. "In exchange, Princess Zarath would have a place of honor in human space, and the Veltar Empire would gain Earth's most precious resource." "Which is?" Zarath found herself asking, her voice barely above a whisper. Chen turned to look at her directly, and for the first time in months, she didn't see pity or disgust in someone's eyes. Instead, she saw something that made her pulse quicken. "Hope? Your Highness, we offer you hope." The chamber erupted in chaos as various factions began arguing among themselves, but Zarath barely heard them. She was staring at this strange human ambassador, wondering if he could possibly mean what his words seemed to imply. As the debate raged around them, Chen stepped closer to her, speaking in a low voice that only she could hear. "Princess," he said quietly, "there's something you should know about humans. We don't believe in throwing away good people just because they're different." Before she could respond, the great doors of the chamber burst open and a figure in military armor strode in. The armor was human-made but modified with alien technology, and the woman wearing it moved with deadly grace despite being barely 5.5 feet tall. "Ambassador Chen," the newcomer said, her voice cutting through the noise like a laser blade. "We have a problem. The hegemony fleet has been spotted 3 systems away. They'll be here within the hour." The chamber fell, silent as the implication sank in. The hegemony was the greatest threat in known space, a collection of species bent on conquest and domination. If they were coming here, well, Chen said calmly, as if discussing the weather, "I suppose we'll have to accelerate our timeline. Princess Zarath, Would you care to see how humans handle impossible odds? Chapter 2. The Human Way. The command deck of the human ship. Defiance was chaos barely contained by discipline. Captain Sarah Morrison stood at the center of it all, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her green eyes scanning the tactical displays with the intensity of a predator. Around her, her crew worked with efficiency born of years fighting against overwhelming odds. Hegemony fleet composition? She asked without looking up from the main display. 12 heavy cruisers, 6 dreadnoughts, and a full carrier group, reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander James Park. Estimated crew complement of 40,000. And us? The Defiance, 2 frigates, and whatever the Veltar can scrape together. Morrison allowed herself a grim smile. So, typical Tuesday then. From across the bridge, Ambassador Chen cleared his throat. Captain, might I remind you that we have a VIP aboard? Morrison turned to see Princess Zarath standing near the communications station. Her damaged leg braced against the deck plating as the ship maneuvered. The alien princess was staring at the tactical display with wide eyes, clearly trying to process what she was seeing. Forgive me, Your Highness, Morrison said, offering a slight bow. I know this isn't exactly the diplomatic mission you signed up for. Zarath's violet eyes met hers. Captain Morrison, is it true what I've heard about humans? That you never surrender? Morrison's smile became genuine. Only one way to find out. Lieutenant Park, status on the Veltar fleet? 3 light cruisers and a handful of fighters. They're requesting orders. Tell them to form up behind us and send a message. To the Hegemony fleet. What should it say, Captain? Morrison looked directly at Zarath as she answered. Tell them that Earth's children don't run from bullies, and if they want the princess, they'll have to go through us. Zarath felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Someone willing to fight for her. Not for political advantage or treaty obligations, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Captain, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in the council chamber. What can I do to help? Morrison raised an eyebrow. Can you handle yourself in a fight? In response, Zarath reached to her side and drew a weapon that made several humans take a step back. The Veltar plasma blade hummed to life, casting violet shadows across the bridge. I may be damaged, Zarath said, but I am still a warrior. Outstanding, Morrison grinned. Welcome to the human way of doing things, Princess. Hope you're ready for a ride. The first Hegemony ships were already appearing on the edge of sensor range when Morrison's communications officer spoke up. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony flagship. They're demanding the immediate surrender of Princess Zarath. Response? Before Morrison could answer, Zarath stepped forward. May I, Captain? Morrison nodded, and Zarath activated the communications array. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of generations of royalty. This is Princess Zarath of the Veltar Empire. I am under the protection of the Terran Federation, and any attempt to take me will be considered an act of war against both our peoples. The response came quickly, a harsh voice speaking in the trade language. Princess, your empire is finished. Surrender now, and your death will be quick. Counteroffer, Morrison interjected, stepping into the communication range. How about you turn around and go home, and we won't have to embarrass you in front of your crews? The laughter that came through the comm system was like grinding metal. Humans, your arrogance will be your downfall. Wouldn't be the first time someone said that, Morrison replied cheerfully. Also wouldn't be the first time they were wrong. As the communication ended, Zarath turned to Morrison with confusion clear on her face. Captain, how can you be so calm? They outnumber us 20-1. Morrison's eyes glinted with something that was part madness, part determination. Princess, let me tell you something about humans. We've been fighting impossible odds since we crawled out of caves on our homeworld. We fought ice ages, predators 10 times our size, diseases that should have wiped us out, and each other for thousands of years. And somehow we're still here. She gestured to the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet. This is just Tuesday. All stations report ready, Captain, came the call from across the bridge. Morrison nodded and settled into her command chair. Zareth, I'd suggest you hold on to something. Things are about to get interesting. The hegemony fleet was closing fast, their massive ships blotting out the stars. But instead of fear, Zareth felt something she had almost forgotten: excitement. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. Captain, she said, gripping the rail beside Morrison's chair, teach me the human way. Morrison's grin was fierce. Lesson 1, Princess. When someone tells you something's impossible, that's when humans get creative. The briefing room aboard the Defiance was cramped with humans, Veltar officers, and holographic displays showing the tactical situation. Princess Zarath sat at the head of the table, her position marking her as an equal participant rather than a protected asset. It was a small gesture, but one that meant everything to her. The hegemony fleet will reach weapons range in 37 minutes, reported Commander Park. Their formation suggests they plan to overwhelm us with concentrated firepower. Captain, Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Standard Imperial doctrine. Use superior numbers to crush resistance quickly. She looked around the table. Fortunately, humans wrote the book on asymmetric warfare. What do you propose? Asked General Thekta, the senior Veltar military officer. His scarred carapace spoke of decades of combat, but even he looked uncertain. Morrison activated a holographic display showing the local space around the station. We can't win a straight fight, but we don't have to win. We just have to survive long enough for reinforcements to arrive. What reinforcements? Zareth asked. The nearest Veltar fleet is 3 days away. Morrison's smile was enigmatic. Who said anything about Veltar reinforcements? Before anyone could ask for clarification, the ship's communications officer appeared on the briefing room screen. Captain, we're receiving multiple hyperspace signatures. Unknown ships dropping out of FTL. Every person in the room tensed. If more hegemony forces were arriving. Identification? Morrison asked calmly. Ma'am, you're not going to believe this. It's a Terran Federation fleet. 43 ships including the Dreadnought, Washington, and the carrier, Enterprise. The silence in the briefing room was deafening. Even by human standards, 43 ships represented a significant force. For Earth to commit so many vessels to what should have been a simple diplomatic mission. How? Zareth whispered. Morrison turned to Ambassador Chen, who had been suspiciously quiet throughout the briefing. James, care to explain? Chen's diplomatic mask slipped, revealing something harder underneath. Princess, when I said we were interested in an alliance, I meant it. The Terran Federation Council voted unanimously to protect you. All of you, he added, looking at the Veltar officers. But why? General Thekta asked. Our empire is failing. Our technology is outdated. What could you possibly gain? You're asking the wrong question, Morrison interjected. The question isn't what we gain, it's what we refuse to lose. She stood and walked to the holographic display, manipulating it to show not just the current battle, but the broader galactic situation. The hegemony has been expanding for 50 years. They've conquered or absorbed dozens of species. Each victory makes them stronger while everyone else gets weaker. Zareth studied the display, her analytical mind processing the implications. You're not just saving us, you're drawing a line. Exactly, Morrison confirmed. Someone has to make a stand. Might as well be us. Captain, the communications officer interrupted again. Admiral Harrison is requesting permission to come aboard. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Sarah Harrison is here personally. She turned to Chen. Just how seriously is Earth taking this? Seriously enough to risk a war, Chen replied simply. 15 minutes later, Admiral Sarah Harrison materialized on the Defiance's transport pad. She was a woman in her 50s, her silver hair cropped short, her uniform bearing the scars of numerous campaigns. When she saw Princess Zareth, she offered a respectful nod. Your Highness, I apologize for the dramatic entrance. Zareth found herself studying this human commander, trying to understand what she represented. Admiral, why did your people come, honestly? Harrison's answer was direct. Because, Princess, we've learned something over the centuries. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing. And we've decided we're done doing nothing. The tactical display, updated, showing the hegemony fleet's reaction to the arrival of human reinforcements. Instead of pressing their attack, they had shifted to a defensive formation. They're reconsidering their options, observed Commander Park. Good, Morrison said. Let them think about it for a while. But Zarath was still focused on the bigger picture. Admiral Harrison, what happens after this? If you drive off the hegemony fleet, they'll just come back with more ships. Harrison's smile was cold. Princess, you're thinking like someone who's been losing for too long. We don't just drive them off. We send a message that reaches every corner of the galaxy. What kind of message? Morrison answered for her admiral. The kind that says humans protect their friends, all of them, no matter the cost. As if summoned by her words, the communications array crackled to life. The harsh voice of the hegemony commander filled the briefing room. Human fleet, you are interfering in internal galactic affairs. Withdraw immediately or face destruction. Admiral, Harrison personally activated the response channel. Hegemony fleet, this is Admiral Harrison of the Terran Federation. Princess Zarath is under our protection. Any hostile action against her or her people will be considered an act of war against Earth and all her colonies. You cannot be serious. You would risk your entire species for one damaged alien? Zarath winced at the word damaged, but Harrison's response came without hesitation. We would risk everything for what's right. That's what makes us human. The communication channel went silent, but the tactical display showed increased activity in the hegemony formation. They were preparing for battle. Well, Morrison said cheerfully, I guess we're doing this the hard way after all. Admiral Harrison turned to Zarath. Princess, I have a question for you. Yes, Admiral? Are you ready to see what humans do when someone threatens our family? Zarath looked around the room at these strange, stubborn people who had risked everything for her. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. Yes, she said firmly. I'm ready. Chapter 4. The Battle for Tomorrow. Space around the ancient Veltar station erupted into chaos as two fleets clashed in a symphony of light and destruction. Plasma beams lanced through the void while missile trails drew deadly patterns against the stars. On the bridge of the Defiance, Princess Zarath watched in amazement as the human fleet moved with precision that defied their reputation for reckless courage. Their formation is breaking, reported Commander Park, studying the tactical display. The hegemony expected us to charge straight at them. Captain Morrison nodded approvingly as she watched human ships execute complex maneuvers that kept them just outside of optimal enemy weapons range. Never give your opponent the fight they want. Make them adapt to you. Zarath gripped the bridge railing as the Defiance rolled to avoid incoming fire. Captain, shouldn't we be running? My people's ships aren't built for this kind of combat. Princess, Morrison replied, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Take a look at your tactical display. Zarath's violet eyes widened as she studied the readings. The three Veltar light cruisers weren't just surviving the battle, they were thriving. Working in coordination with human frigates, they were using their superior maneuverability to strike at enemy weak points before fading back into formation. How are they doing that? She asked in wonder. Because they're not fighting alone anymore, Morrison explained. Your people are excellent tacticians, Princess. They just needed someone to believe in them again. Across the bridge, the communications officer called out, Captain, Admiral Harrison is requesting all ships prepare for maneuver Delta 7. Morrison's grin was predatory. Now we get to show them something special. All hands prepare for gravitational slingshot maneuver. Zarath had heard of this technique but had never seen it attempted in combat. Using a planet's gravity well to accelerate beyond normal engine capabilities was dangerous enough in peacetime. In the middle of a battle, it was madness. Captain Morrison, she said urgently, if you miscalculate, we die. Morrison finished cheerfully. But if we don't try, we lose anyway. Sometimes you have to roll the dice, Princess. The human fleet began moving toward the gas giant that dominated the local system, their formation tight and precise. The hegemony commanders, recognizing the maneuver, moved to intercept before the humans could complete their acceleration. "They're taking the bait," observed Commander Park. "Of course they are," Morrison replied. "They can't let us gain that much speed advantage." What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. As the hegemony fleet moved to block the human approach to the gas giant, Admiral Harrison's ship suddenly reversed course, using their momentum to execute a perfect fleet-wide reversal that brought them face-to-face with the enemy at point-blank range. The hegemony formation, designed for long-range bombardment, was devastated by the sudden close-quarters engagement. Human ships, built for exactly this kind of brutal knife fight, pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. "My God," whispered General Thekta from his position at the auxiliary tactical station. "They turned the entire fleet around in perfect formation." Zarath found herself laughing despite the danger. "They're insane, completely brilliantly insane." "That's humans for you," Morrison said proudly. "We excel at controlled insanity." But the battle wasn't over. The hegemony flagship, a massive dreadnought twice the size of any human vessel, began powering up its main weapon, a planet-killing beam designed to crack worlds. "They're targeting the station," Park reported urgently. 30,000 civilians. Morrison's expression went cold. "Not happening. Helm, intercept course. Full power." "Captain," Zarath said urgently, "that weapon will destroy us." "Maybe," Morrison acknowledged, "but it won't destroy the station." As the Defiance moved to position itself between the hegemony flagship and the civilian station, Zarath made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "Captain, request permission to address the hegemony commander." Morrison looked at her in surprise. "Princess, this isn't the time for diplomacy." "Trust me," Zarath said, her voice carrying new authority. "Please." Morrison nodded to her communications officer, who opened a channel to the enemy flagship. "Hegemony commander," Zarath said, her voice ringing across the comm system. "I am Princess Zarath of the Veltar Empire. I challenge you to single combat." The human bridge fell silent. Even among warrior species, single combat challenges during fleet actions were unheard of. The hegemony commander's response came through with obvious amusement. "You? A damaged royal with a broken leg? This is your grand gesture?" Zarath's eyes blazed with violet fire. "I am Zarath, daughter of Emperor Velkan, trained in the 7 classical forms of combat, and under the protection of the Terran Federation. Are you afraid to face one damaged royal?" The challenge hung in space like a living thing. In warrior cultures throughout the galaxy, such a formal challenge could not be ignored without losing face. The hegemony commander found himself trapped by his own people's traditions. "Very well," came the grudging reply. "Single combat. But when you fall, your human friends watch 30,000 innocents die. And when I win," Zarath replied coolly, "your fleet withdraws from Veltar space permanently." Captain Morrison leaned close to her. "Princess, you don't have to do this." Zarath turned to face her, and Morrison saw something in the alien's eyes that hadn't been there before. Confidence, purpose, hope. "Captain, all my life I've been told I'm not good enough because of my injuries. But you humans taught me something important." She smiled, and it transformed her scarred face completely. "Being different doesn't make you weak. It makes you creative." As Zarath prepared to transport to the neutral ground between the fleets, a small asteroid that would serve as their arena, Ambassador Chen approached her. "Princess," he said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something personal." She paused in her preparations. "What is it, Ambassador?" Chen's diplomatic mask finally fell away completely, revealing the man beneath. "My name is James Chen. I'm not just an ambassador. I'm also the man who's been corresponding with you for the past 6 months." Zarath's eyes widened in shock. "The poetry? The discussions about literature and philosophy? That was you?" "Every word," he confirmed. "I know this isn't the time, But I needed you to know. When I said Earth offers you hope, I meant it personally as well as politically. For a moment, the bridge of the defiance fell away, and there were just two people looking at each other across the void of space and species. James, she said softly, when I return from this fight, we need to talk. When you return, he agreed. Not if, when. As Princess Zareth transported away to face an enemy champion in single combat, she carried with her something that had been missing from her life for years. The knowledge that someone believed in her not despite her differences, but because of them. The battle for her people's future was about to begin. But the battle for her own future had already been won. Epilogue, New Beginnings. 6 months later. The gardens of New Veltar bloomed under an alien sun, their exotic flowers creating patterns of color that would have been impossible on the old homeworld. Princess Zareth walked slowly between the growing beds, her mechanical leg brace gleaming in the golden light. The injury that had once marked her as damaged now seemed merely a part of who she was, no more defining than the color of her eyes or the sound of her laugh. The earth roses are adapting well to the soil composition, observed Dr. Sarah Kim, the human botanist who had helped design the colony's agricultural systems. Another few months and we should have a full hybrid bloom. Zareth smiled, kneeling, carefully to examine a promising bud. My people believe that flowers which grow in foreign soil become stronger, more beautiful. Perhaps they're right. Speaking of adaptation, came a familiar voice from behind them. The integration reports from the other colonies are all positive. Humans and Veltar working together better than anyone predicted. Zareth turned to see former Ambassador James Chen approaching through the garden paths. He had resigned his diplomatic position 3 months ago to take a new role as Colonial Integration Coordinator. The change suited him. Gone was the formal diplomatic bearing, replaced by something more relaxed and genuinely happy. The agricultural yields on Colony 7 are particularly impressive, he continued, settling beside her on the garden bench. Combining human farming techniques with Veltar biotechnology has produced crops that are 30% more efficient than either species. Achieved alone. Hybrid vigor, Zareth mused, unconsciously echoing the biological principle. Two different systems creating something stronger together. Their hands found each other naturally, a gesture that had become as comfortable as breathing over the past months. The sight still drew curious looks from both humans and Veltar, but no longer the shocked stares it once had. Princess, Dr. Kim said diplomatically. I should check on the atmospheric processors. The terraforming committee meets in an hour. As the botanist departed, leaving them alone among the growing things, James turned to face Zareth directly. There's something I need to ask you. Another integration challenge, she asked, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. Not exactly. James reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that made Zareth's breath catch. It was a human engagement ring, but modified with Veltar crystal work that caught the light and threw back rainbows. Zareth, you changed everything, for me, for both our peoples. You showed us that being different isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Zareth felt her heart's racing as James continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was asking. I know we're from different worlds, different species. I know there will be challenges we can't even imagine yet, but I also know that I've never met anyone who makes me want to be a better person the way you do. He held out the ring, his hands remarkably steady. Will you marry me? For a moment, Zareth was back in the Galactic Council chamber, hearing rejection after rejection. But this wasn't about political alliance or species compatibility. This was about two people who had found something worth fighting for. James, she said softly. When I was young, I used to dream about fairy tales. Stories where the princess was rescued by a brave knight. She took the ring, marveling at how it seemed to glow with inner light. But you didn't rescue me. You showed me how to rescue myself. She slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit, perfectly despite being designed for a completely different species anatomy. Yes, James Chen, I will marry you. Their kiss was interrupted by cheering from the direction of the colonial administrative buildings. They broke apart to see Captain Morrison approaching with Admiral Harrison and a delegation of both human and Veltar officials. Sorry to interrupt, Morrison called out cheerfully, but the entire colony's been watching through the security feeds. Dr. Kim may have mentioned something about a proposal to the terraforming committee. Admiral Harrison stepped forward with a formal expression that quickly melted into a genuine smile. Congratulations, both of you. This is going to mean a lot to both our peoples. With respect, Admiral, Zarath said, rising to face her. This isn't about politics or species relations. This is about love. Sometimes, Harrison replied wisely, the two aren't mutually exclusive. Your wedding will be the first formal union between a human and a Veltar. Whether you intended it or not, you're setting a precedent. James squeezed Zarath's hand gently. Are you ready for that kind of attention? Zarath looked around at the gathered crowd, humans and Veltar, military personnel and civilians, all watching her with expressions of hope and excitement, rather than pity or disgust. For so many years, attention had meant judgment, rejection, disappointment. Now it meant something entirely different. James, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the garden. I spent my whole life being rejected because I was different. I'm not going to start hiding who I am now that I've found someone who loves me because of those differences. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause that could be heard across the colony. As the celebration began around them, Zarath and James stood together in the growing dusk, watching the first stars appear over their new world. So, James said quietly, what happens now? Now, Zarath replied, leaning against his shoulder, we write our own fairy tale. Above them, the stars that had once seemed so distant and cold now blazed with promise. Two species, two worlds, two hearts that had found their way to each other across the vast darkness of space. In the end, it wasn't about political alliances, or military victories or technological advances. It was about hope. Hope that differences could be strengths. Hope that love could bridge any gap. Hope that sometimes the damaged princess and the stubborn human diplomat could find exactly what they needed in each other, and in a galaxy that had grown cynical and divided, hope was the most powerful force of all. The end.